Even though race is fake, the consequences are real. So I want children to know that, and especially white children, I want them to know that they have skin in the game, literally, that this is their fight. They were born into a system that is corrupt and wants to use them, wants to flow through them, wants to placate them and make them comfortable so they never challenge it. And I'm telling them, challenge it.
Systemic racism is all-encompassing, ever-present, and it has been. And one of the reasons that it hasn't been addressed in the way that it needs to be addressed is because we're not having these conversations. Unless you have enough insight to explore it and understand it and bring it to the forefront, you will either be complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in just perpetuating continued systemic racism.
And the fact that you're not talking about it sort of suggests that it's shameful or that it's not, this is just the way things are. You know, some people are superior to other people. That's why they have more power. That's why they have more things. So in order to disrupt that, you really need to talk about race, about their own race, about where they're situated in the world and how they can affect change.
When you have these sort of conversations with your child, you know, you want to try and be as calm as possible, but if you feel very spirited in doing so, I think that's a great thing. You don't want to get to the point where you're so outraged that you can't really have the conversation and it's like scaring your kid. But if they see that you seem hurt, you seem sad, that gives them an idea or some sort of perspective for how they should feel.
As grown-ups, we're much more equipped to deal with issues of, fear and rage and hatred that may come as a part of talking about really tough issues like racism. And we have to be honest with our kids, but we shouldn't be prescriptive about how we ask them to grapple with issues of race. They have the ability and power to, I think, deal with the complexity and to see the nuance.
So if they're already sensing that racism is happening, if they already know full well, it's not even a sensory thing. They've seen it. They've seen those videos. They've seen you react to those videos. They've seen you head out to a Black Lives Matter march. They know that something's up.
This is not something that will be traumatic, for your child to hear about. I mean, it's something that happens. And if you have those sort of concerns, then you want to be mindful about what information you're giving them, and you want to be developmentally appropriate.
But whether they're really little, 2 or, 17, the thing to really do is to ask them questions. And that's sort of good parenting practice as well, is to see where they are. Some of what they've been exposed to in your home, but you might not know what's going on at the daycare or at the high school. So you can really ask questions also to see how are they making sense of this? Because the way you intend them to make sense of it is not necessarily how they're making sense of it.
With young kids, you want to talk about mistreatment of Black people by white people. And we don't need to talk about embedded systemic racism, because those are concepts that that's going to go right over the kid's head as a kid gets older. 8 to 10, you start talking about this. This is something that happens at a lot of places. Sometimes, people of color are followed around in stores. So you give them those sort of specific examples, or they don't get to go to the same schools, or their schools don't have, as you see, the same access to laptops and computers. And why is that? So, this is known as systemic racism. It's not just this one school. It's a lot of, Black schools are like this, or minority urban schools.
Part of the challenge a lot of parents and other caregivers have is that the first time they have the explicit conversation about race is a time when they feel compelled to by circumstances, right? So it's some horrible thing happened at school or in the country. It's Charlottesville, right? It's protests around police violence and brutality against Black people. And they feel obligated then. And it feels fraught, it feels high stakes, but which is why if you can start having the conversation when it's lower stake, maybe it's about, your young child makes an observation, which they do, right? Little kids will make observations. That's okay.
First conversation I had with my eldest son, he was 4. He was riding on the back of my bike. And we saw a young man being arrested on the corner, a young Black man. And I said, okay, this is it. This is my moment. And I said, the young man being arrested, just so you know, whatever he did or didn't do, there were 50 white men, same age, within a mile of this spot right here, who are doing the very same thing, and no one is calling the police on them. He doesn't remember what I said, but he remembered that I stopped the bike. At the very least, no matter what I said, they knew they could talk to me about whiteness and Blackness. And they knew that something's up and it's not fair. And that's enough to start.
It means something to your kid when they see that you're not afraid to talk about it, because then they're not afraid to talk about it. It means something when you can lift up your voice and say something isn't right, because then they follow suit. You are your kid's biggest role model. So step into that and lean into that and know that you can really change outcomes because of how you talk to your child.
It's wrong. It's a setup. The game is rigged. Now let's talk about it. That's easy. And the kids get that. They get the idea of a game being rigged. What do you mean? Well, and then you can start rolling. It doesn't have to be so, that's a lie too. That's part of the lie of whiteness, that we can't talk about it without getting all tense. Notice if you get tense, if your jaw gets really tight, if your stomach hurts while you're talking about it, notice that. But also, it's pretty simple. Pretty simple and straightforward. The truth is that Black lives matter. The lie is that white lives matter more. It's just anybody can get that.
It's not about being, again, perfect. It's not about, right? It's trying to do better, trying to stay with it and do better. You
don't suddenly achieve the state of, being an anti-racist and then you don't have to do anything. It's really about a practice that all of us have room to improve.
If this is being done in the right way, you're going to have so many conversations about these sort of things. So start as basic as you can with a kid.
I think it's a conversation for everyone. It is not just for Black and white parents and families. And I think the more inclusive we are in our language, the more inclusive we are in bringing the larger society and community into an understanding of this, then we really start to get at this bigger nut that's equity.
And all we can do really is prepare kids as best we can to think thoughtfully, be informed about race and be brave, we like to say, because we don't actually know what it'll look like for them, in 50 years. So we have to give them the tools to hopefully come up with solutions that, we couldn't because we didn't have the tools, so that's really what we're trying to do, is better situate them, or better prepare them for a future, today, but also a future that we can't even imagine yet.
So they're better friends and better boyfriends, and and they respect authority in the form of Black and brown teachers, principals, neighbors. And they also know there's currents going on all the time underneath and all through these interactions. But the main thing is they believe in racism. They believe it. So they don't waste their own time or anyone else's time defending racism, defending white supremacy. They're like, no, I get it. Tell me more about what you experienced. How do I understand this situation better through a lens of race?
You are setting them up to be resilient, to be thoughtful, to be empathetic, to be kind, and frankly, to be champions of a better society.